Okay, I think we might start again. So I'm on to that part of the handout which says there's a problem. So we've talked about the cognition of the self, and we've talked enough about the recognition of the self, and now, it's to the problem, and that's that what we are depending on here is first-person psychological evidence and whether such experiences are reliable. So now think about this, someone who says, I feel as if I tell you this, I feel as if I have a stomachache. And I go to the doctor and I say, I feel as if I have a stomachache. The doctor does an X-ray or whatever, ultrasound, whatever it is that they do. They do some really good tests and they say, you don't have a stomachache, go away. But I still insist. I feel I have a stomachache. Can he question that? Can he say to me, can the doctor say to me, I don't think you feel a stomachache? Can't say that, right? There's something different about it feels a certain way, it looks a certain way. If I say that this chair looks green to me, you can't question that. Someone who has jaundice says the walls look yellow to me. Can't question that. It's the way certain things look. If we are talking about the color of the chair, is this gray or is this green? That's a question, we can debate. But you can't debate, it looks green to me. Because that's how it looks to me, right? You might tell me you're confused, your color words are confused. Green is what we use for the sort of thing in that jumper, not for the sort of thing here. This is really not green, or, there's a green pen there. Look, that's what's green, monomer. Now, but if I keep insisting, this looks green to me, that kind of evidence cannot be questioned. And that's exactly, the trouble with phenomenological arguments is that there is no interpersonal verification that can be done. You can't, like the doctor can't say to me, you don't feel a stomachache. The doctor can say, there is nothing wrong with you. Your stomach's absolutely fine. But the doctor cannot say to me, no, Monomer, you don't feel a stomachache. Go home and continue doing what you need to be doing. Because I do feel a stomachache. Then I might go to another specialist. I might think I have cancer or, something more exotic, and so on and so forth, or some referred pain because of something that happened to my back, whatever. But if I feel I have a stomachache, that kind of thing, no one can question. So there is no interpersonal verification that is possible, and that makes these arguments a little bit weak, because there's always the possibility you've got it wrong, right? For science, we want something that can be verified. Or for, believing someone, for proof, we want something that can be verified. So here is something that the Mimamsakas say, and I think it's quite a useful strategy. So whenever we talk about, should we believe first-person evidence, the Mimamsakas say that if it feels that way to you, you take it to be so, unless there is reason to doubt it, unless there is further. So every cognition, as it arises, must be taken at face value, unless there is reason to doubt it. So the point is something like this. So if you are in a desert and you're really thirsty and you see, a bit of gleam on the sand, like you do with the sun, and you think, oh, there's some water there, right? At face value, you take that for granted and you walk towards it because you're thirsty. Now, that is contradicted by further evidence, because when you get there, you realize there is no water there, right? It was just the sand particles shining under the sun, right? So that's what you realize at that point. And that's further contradiction. So Mimamsakas say, cognition, or what we know, or what we see, or what we feel is not infallible. It's not that we always get it right, but we have to take it at face value unless there is further reason to contradict it, right? So this is how someone might have a doubt when they're sleeping. Philosophers often have these doubts. If I get up and put my feet on the floor might melt. So I'm not going to get up today, right? The philosophers might have this doubt. If I get out of bed and put my feet on the floor might melt. And the Mimamsa are going to say, well, if it doesn't look like that the floor is going to melt, you should go ahead and do it. Because otherwise, if you want to be absolutely sure, you want to be infallible, can't be mistaken, then you won't be able to do anything. Then skepticism is the only answer. You know, you won't be able to continue with your life. You have to take things on face value and act in a certain way unless there is contradiction of a further experience. So cognitions, so if it seems to you that it is the same person who had the earlier experience and now remembers, then you have to take that as face value unless there is reason, unless there is another cognition that contradicts it. Unless your friend says, no, you are misremembering, you must take it as. So there's always the possibility. So the Mimamsa is saying, you know, that you feel a certain way, or that you see things a certain way, or that things look a certain way to you, you can't question it, because otherwise you won't be able to function. You have to take things at face value and function practically, and then if it turns out, but we never said this is infallible. We just said that this has to be taken unless you find out that you're mistaken. Yeah.
What if your memory runs deeper than that? So say, for example, for singing when you were drunk, last time you went out, you thought you were singing, and then your friends say, no, you weren't singing, and you go, ah, okay, go on and sing. That doesn't change anything about the way I sing myself. That's fine. But what if you got told, I don't know, you always thought you were really good at basketball, and then you get told, no, actually, you were really rubbish, we just pretended you were good. That's going to change the way, kind of your personality, the way you see yourself. So it runs deeper than that, in a way that if that memory is false, and you realise it's false, then that changes who you are.
Yeah.
And that isn't explained by that, face value.
I think what is happening in the point that you're making, and that was, similar to the point that was earlier made about, what we identify with, who you think you are, for using that, what is it, SPS? Who do you think you are? Who you think you are and who you are two different things. Let me clarify this, because we identify with certain things, right? I think I'm a woman. I think I'm a philosopher. I mean, someone might tell me, my ideas are so bad. I've always, sort of identified as being a philosopher. And someone would tell me, my ideas are so bad, you really shouldn't be in the philosophy department, let alone be heading it. Get up, wake up. You're not a philosopher. You don't think well. And that would shake my self-conception. That's the kind of thing you were worried about earlier as well. That's something that's really important to me. But that's not the self that the Hindus are talking about. That's what you identify with. We have a certain self-conception. They're saying, is there something that continuously exists that underlies the self-conception? That's what we are interested in getting at. What you relate to, what you identify with, whether you identify as a male or whether you identify as a gay or a lesbian or a transgender, what you identify with is not. Those are categories. I might think I'm very smart, and I might realize that's not really the case. I might be shown to be quite stupid, and that might shake my self-conception, but that's not, the self-conception is not at issue. What is at issue here is there a self, a continuously existing thing that underlies this self-conception? And on the basis of which my self-conception might change over a period of time. Hindus don't have a problem with that. I might, think myself to be a philosopher, and then later on, I might become a painter. And that's what becomes really important to my identity. Being a painter, I forget about, being a philosopher. It's much more fun painting. I could not do art. I could only paint walls. That's the kind of painter I'd be. So we're not sort of talking about what we relate to or what our self-conception is. The self we are talking about is there a substance underlying this? So what I want to do now is look at some Buddhist objections to this view, and part of it will help clarify the view. So the first thing that the Buddhists have to say is what is called the circularity objection, which is, memory presupposes a self. If you define memory the way the Mimamsakas do, that earlier you and the now you are the same thing, then memory is just presupposing the self. How can memory, be proof for the self? And the other point in the circularity objection, the second point in the circularity objection is memory itself is a mental state. How can you use memory to prove the soul substance? This entirely different thing, which is not even a mental state. Because after all you have, is memory. You're using memory to prove this other thing. What might the Mimamsaka say to this objection? Memory presupposes a self. Memory cannot show that, memory cannot work as a proof for the self. It's a circular argument. You use memory to show that a self exists, but memory, in the way you explain memory, you're already presupposing that the same self exists over time. So how can that be used as an argument? And the Mimamsa point is, no. We are not presupposing the existence of the self. Memory is important because memory works as evidence for the self, because the self is revealed. They say a continuously existing self is revealed in memory. Memory directly reveals one. So back to the phenomenological point, you see yourself as being identical with that being in the past that had the experience. They're not saying that memory, memory is a proof of the self in the sense that it presupposes the self. It says, think about your memory experience. Try and remember an important experience, and you will remember that it was you doing the thing earlier. So memory is giving you evidence. So it's an evidential claim. They think, yes, memory is good evidence. It's not circular. Memory is not presupposing a self. We want you to think about your memory experiences. Use your first-person psychological experience of memory to see what is it that memory reveals. And they say memory reveals a continuing self. The second point, how can memory reveal something other than a mental state? That's a bit more difficult to answer. But I'll have something to say about it in a bit. At times, when you look at the Mimamsa argument, at times it seems that the Mimamsa argument is just an argument from language again. And the Buddhist response to that is, so Mimamsa keep on saying, so if I read a little bit of the argument again, this is what says, hence there is something besides the collection of skandhas to which this word I applies. So it seems like it's the argument from language. Here we do not consider the word that we employ as a means for inferring another thing. Rather, we consider the experience of recognition. So one concern that the Buddhists have, and that's a concern about using words in the language to infer things in the world. That's what the Nyaya do. They always say, remember we talked about it last time. The Nyaya even say darkness, because there's a word like darkness. there must be absences. Absences are real things in the world. You would see, if I walked out of class, you would see the absence of monomer in this room. That's something you see. You see absence. So absence is a real thing. If I turned off the lights, there'd be darkness. That's the absence of light. Absences are real things because they can be perceived according to the Nyaya. So that's the Nyaya argument from language. And the Buddhists are saying that's just crazy. We have lots and lots of words in our language that we just make up. And the term I is one of those things. Sure, there are chairs and tables, and there's physical and mental states, and there's physical stuff and mental state, but what does the I refer to, an inner self? No, the I is just a figment of our imagination. There's the physical stuff, and there's the mental stuff, and that their argument is similar to that. All of you agree, this is fingers and palm. There's some fingers, a thumb, and a palm. Now, if I say, over and above these fingers and thumb and a palm, there exists a fist. The Buddhists say, no, that's just a made-up word, fingers and palms in a certain way. And this is an example from the Buddhist text that we look at, not next week because it's a revision week, but the week after. Buddhists say there's nothing like a fist. It's just fingers and palm in a certain organization, in a certain structure, in a certain way. That's what a fist is. There's nothing, we don't have to say fingers and palms exist and fists exist, right? Because then we'll have to say there is that configuration, we have to give that one name and that one name and so on and so forth. There'd be too many things in the world, right? They just say we think about the basic things. So they say mental and physical states exist, but not the term I. The term I just refers to mental and physical states in a certain combination. That's all there is. There's nothing more. There's no selves. I does not refer to a self. And the Mimamsa, again, want to say their argument is not an argument from language, because they're not using that the term, they're not saying that the term I must have a referent, and that's the self. They're using the experience of recognition. Now, self-recognition is, they're using this experience of recognizing that there is the same self over time. That's the basis of their inference. It's not an argument from language, and I think we need to understand that Mimamsa argument is a phenomenological argument that depends on first-person evidence, and it's that what they take for granted, that you see yourself as existing over time in memory experiences. I think it sounds like a broken record, so I'll stop saying that over and over again. But that's their point. A cognition has to be taken at, and here's another argument. I mean, the Buddhists say, why do we need, which is I've called the argument from phenomenology, why do we need a persisting self to explain memory? Why can't, again, to the Nyaya argument, they make the same objection that they make to the Mimamsa argument, they make the same objection as they make to the Nyaya argument, which is why do we need to question? Why do we need to posit a self? Why can't causal experiences explain it? Why can't we just say causal relations can explain memory? Again, the Mimamsa is going to say that, what we see in memory, so the phenomenological content of memory is much richer. We see ourselves as being identical, but we don't see causal relations. None of us have a grasp of our causal relations, that how did the earlier experience leave a memory trace? We don't see any of those connections. Right? That's just stuff which is below the level of experience. It's, below the level of experiences. So causal relations cannot explain experience. There must be something else. We want an explanation of this experience that I have, that I am the same thing that existed in the past. The Buddhist objection, causal relations can explain memory, can work. But the Buddhist explanation that causal relations can explain our experience of memory, what we experience in memory as being the same over time, that cannot work, because causal relations, I mean, as you know, are not transparent. We don't know what the causal relations are. So how can we, from the first person perspective, you know, from our own perspective, we don't experience causal relations, so we can't take them as proof for explaining memory. We need to have the, you know, the kind of thing that explains memory is a continuing self. What we want is an explanation of phenomenological content. The last point, which, you know, is a worry about this phenomenological experiences, is this: why, you know, why do we think, what reason is there for believing our first person? I said earlier, you know, you can't tell me, Monica, you don't feel as if you have a stomachache. I'm not claiming I have a stomachache. I'm just saying it feels like I have a stomachache. Or, you know, one of you says, I'm so sick of hearing this word phenomenology, it feels like I have a headache, right? And I can't tell you, no, you don't have a headache, right? When it feels like a headache, that has to be taken. But Wittgenstein makes this point that such statements don't carry any value at all, because such statements, you can't be wrong about them. And he says, if you can't be wrong about something, you can't be right about it either. You need to, there has to be the possibility of being mistaken. Only then a statement can carry any weight, because it can be true if there's a possibility of it being false. If you can't be wrong about something, then, as he puts it, you can't be right about it. Another way of putting the same point is, you know, if something has to be scientifically believed, it has to be testable, or as a famous philosophy of science professor put it, Popper, it has to be falsifiable. There should be some way of checking out whether this is true or false. If it can't be false, it can't be true either. So you can't give any weight to it. Again, you know, there's nothing much to say. I just want to give you the two sides of the coin here. Phenomenological arguments on one reading are very strong because, you know, they depend on first-person evidence, and first-person evidence cannot be questioned. It must be taken at first value. Otherwise, we would not be able to function. Practically, we would not be able to function. If I'm all the time saying, I'm not going to walk back to the Menzies building unless you can assure me, you can absolutely assure me 100%, if it's infallibly true that there's not going to be an earthquake and a sinkhole is not going to form between here and the Menzies building, I won't move. Well, then I have to be stuck at one place, because no one can, you know, 100% assure me that that's not going to happen. We need to, and you know, why should I believe the sun will rise tomorrow? No one can assure me that the sun can rise tomorrow, but it's a good thing to believe because it's done so every day in the past. So you just take things for granted unless there is, you know, further evidence, there is good evidence to grant that. On the other hand, you know, can we really, you know, give weight to this criticism, to such statements? Maybe not, because they cannot be verified. Just one last point about persistent versus eternality, and we will finish quite early today, which I guess is good. And that point is, all that we've been talking about as yet is persistence. You know, all that memory proves, if it proves anything, is that things continue to exist. The same thing remembered that had the experience last week, that same thing remembers it now. So that proves, you know, persistence over a week or persistence over a lifetime. Let's say you can remember something that you did when you were 5 and you remember it now. So that means we can prove that you existed from age 5 to age whatever it is now. But you can't prove eternality. Remember, the kind of self that the Hindus wanted is the self that continues to exist eternally, something that cannot be destroyed, something that does not go out of existence. Memory just does not work for proving eternality because you cannot remember. I mean, we just do not have the capacity to form memories in the first few months of our life. There's scientific reason to believe. So if anything, memory proves the opposite of eternality. If memory is approved, then it can only prove that we can't be eternal things because we don't remember past lifetimes. We don't remember, in fact, there is scientific reason to think we don't remember the first few weeks or the first few months of this very lifetime. We just cannot remember that. So memory can't prove eternality. So what's the point? The Mimamsakas actually had a very good response to this argument. They say it's very important to prove persistence because once we prove persistence, there is an easy way to prove eternality. Okay, so persistence, what does memory prove? The same thing continues to exist. The same thing continues to exist over time. And they say, but everything else in the universe changes over time. Mental states change, physical states change, everything else. So if the soul is if we can prove something that does not change over time, we can prove it must be distinct from all these other things. We have proved a distinct eternal self because nothing else, everything else is subject to change and eventual decay, except things that do not change. And through memory, we can discover one thing, the self, that does not change. That's what they're saying. They said, no, no, no. All we need to prove is something that does not change over time. And then we have come across a kind of thing which is different from everything else in the world. Everything else changes over time. Mental states change, physical states change, chairs change, bodies change, so on and so forth. But once we can prove something that does not change, I remember me, myself, the very same thing, being here last week. Once you have that, you can prove eternality because it is unlike anything in the physical universe. Everything in the physical universe is subject to change and eventual decay. But just by proving memory, we can actually go on to prove eternality. Because this kind of thing is unlike everything in this universe. It couldn't be physical stuff or mental stuff because in their times, everyone agrees. No physical atom continues forever. No mental state continues forever. Those things keep changing. And we still agree with that. If they've discovered something that doesn't change over time, they have discovered a different kind of substance altogether. Is that right? So if you've discovered something, let's give them that. Give them the bit that, memory does prove that there is the self. There is something that doesn't change over time. At least, for a week, it was me. If I remember last week's lecture, there is a sense in which it was me that was here last week, and it's the same thing that is here today. If that's the case, then I have proven something that is unchangeable, and that's got to be unlike anything you find in the physical world. So we've discovered a different kind of substance through memory. Yeah.
I don't think the argument is as strong as I'm trying to make it.
I'm not trying to make it strong.
As they try to make
Yeah.
it. Maybe I say I've got an experience from when I was born to now. I've got 19 years of saying, yeah, that is a constant thing. But maybe there's stuff in the physical world that even though it exists forever, it exists constantly for a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing we're proving is that we exist constantly for long periods. This planet's constantly changing, like its physical attributes are constantly changing. Let's say we've got whatever, let's just hold on to it, but for a millisecond, or whatever it is, it might be the same thing constantly. So we just proving we exist for longer.
Yeah, so you're just saying, but
Not eternally.
yeah, you think that mental and physical states also have some persistence. And they persist for short periods of time, but they do persist. And so we haven't, just by showing that something is persisting, we haven't discovered a different kind of substance altogether. Good point. I don't think they're right in saying that. Any other responses? No? Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. That's all I had to say today, so thank you. Finished early, and next week is going to be revision week, and we're going to look at the essay questions, we'll look at the sample exam, and then we'll come back after the break and look at the Buddhist stuff. So it will be a revision week. No new material will be covered.